Some people skillfully conceal their dark sides, and one can live for years alongside cruel criminals without even suspecting it. However, all that is hidden becomes evident when evil bursts out. Recently, something similar happened in Ecuador. The protagonist of today's story, Paula Ortega, lived in the Sangalki province of Pichincha, Ecuador. She was a mother of 2 daughters, aged 14 and 4. Together with her husband, they ran a small business in the city center, selling items for organizing parties and celebrations, such as balloons, piñatas, and other attributes. The whole family worked in this store, building a thriving business. Paula and her husband were successful businessmen and sociable people. They raised their daughters, supporting each other. Their family was well known and respected in Sangalki. The success story began thanks to Paula's father, who boldly invested in the business. However, the idol was suddenly shattered on Monday, January 2, 2023. Paula woke up in her home, and her husband was in Quito, planning to return to Sangalki around 6 p.m. Paula spent the entire day in the store, where her usual assistant was absent. But on this day, in particular, he was not there. As Paula arranged items in the store, 2 unfamiliar men entered, looking menacing. They started a conversation, pretending to be customers, but Paula felt that something was wrong. One of the men approached the counter, talking to her, while the other slowly walked around the store, assessing the situation. The situation became tense, and Paula felt that these men did not come for balloons. She sensed a threat and fear, realizing that her life was in danger. Paula stepped away from the counter, saying she needed to contact the manager. However, she chose not to call the police or anyone else. Instead, she phoned her mother and told her about the suspicious individuals in the store. Her mother advised her to close the store since it was already late in the evening, and there were no expected customers. Despite being retired, Paula's mother promised to come to the store as soon as she could. Paula also contacted her husband, explaining the situation to him. However, he told her not to close the store, as these people might be potential customers and could possibly make a purchase. Paula's mother continued to persuade her to close the store and leave, but Paula didn't listen, citing her husband's words. Eventually, realizing that their presence had caused concern, the 2 men simply left. Finally convinced by her mother to leave the store, Paula closed it about an hour after the strangers appeared, around 7 p.m. Her husband picked her up from the store. Paula suggested going home and having dinner, but her husband refused. According to him, their older daughter expressed a desire to have hamburgers, and he suggested stopping by to get them. Paula called her daughter, but she replied that she didn't ask for anything to eat. Nevertheless, she agreed to go with her husband to the fast food restaurant. Her husband parked the car a block away from the restaurant, which was unusual for him. Usually, he could block traffic and violate rules, but this time he stopped according to regulations. He got out of the car, leaving his wife inside, claiming it was too cold outside. The events that followed were reconstructed from surveillance camera footage left in the car. Paula didn't manage to get out, and 2 unknown men approached the vehicle. She believed that her husband, locking the doors, ensured her safety. However, the car's headlights blinked, betraying that the doors were open. Paula sensed danger deep inside. She realized that the perpetrators were serious. The woman quickly understood that she had no opportunity to escape. Paula found herself trapped. The car was unlocked, and the criminals easily entered through the doors. One of them remained in the driver's seat, making a call, while the other entered the back of the car and inflicted several stab wounds to Paula's face, neck, and shoulder. The criminals then fled, leaving the victim to die, bleeding profusely. Despite the severe injuries, she remained alive. After a few minutes, her husband, Christian Navarrete, returned. However, his reaction was surprisingly calm. He didn't rush to help his wife but immediately took out his mobile phone. Christian called the rescue service, but when the operator began asking questions, he remained silent for a few seconds and then hung up. He then called one of the relatives, her cousin. Initially, he reported that his wife had been kidnapped, but later he changed his story, claiming that he had found her body with stab wounds. The cousin suggested urgently taking the woman to the hospital. To this, Christian replied that he was just about to do that and then hung up. There was a 24-hour hospital just a couple of blocks away, where medical assistance could be provided. The attack occurred around 7:28 p.m. However, instead of heading to the nearest clinic, Christian called the rescue service at 7:28 p.m. and hung up. After that, he contacted the victim's relatives and spent some time dealing with his mobile phone. Then, finally, he got behind the wheel but didn't go to the nearest hospital, which would have been logical, knowing the city. Instead, he headed to the most distant hospital he could find on the map. There, a nurse familiar with Paula's relatives was on duty. At that moment, the attack victim was still breathing but in critical condition, suffering significant blood loss. The blood-splattered interior of the family car spoke eloquently about the horrifying incident. Medical professionals observed knife wounds on the woman's body and reported the incident to the police. Officers were dispatched to the clinic to investigate the circumstances of the attack on the woman. Despite the medical assistance, the victim of the assault had lost too much blood and passed away on the operating table. When doctors informed the husband of the news of Paula's death, he began to behave very strangely. Initially, he grabbed his hair, shouted, kicked furniture, nervously paced around the room between the window and the door. However, after a while, the man noticed the surprised reaction of the medical staff. Christian didn't cry or show remorse for his wife's death after his outburst of aggression. The man calmly checked something on his mobile phone and took no further action. When the police arrived at the scene, they spoke with the deceased's husband. Christian was calm, stating that he was fortunate because he had gone for hamburgers at the moment when unknown assailants attacked his wife. According to him, she was clearly a victim of robbery since she had lost several valuable items. Christian claimed that he left the car locked and Paula refused to go with him, citing the cold weather and her fatigue. When the man returned, he saw his wife injured and the car open, after which he immediately started calling the rescue service and took his wife to the hospital. At this stage, he was not suspected of involvement in the incident. His story sounded logical. Everyone knew this couple as two loving individuals who had been together for many years, raising two daughters. Christian had always been close to his wife. The family couple had hundreds of photographs with their daughters and all their relatives, capturing the happy faces of the young spouses in memorable moments of life. It all looked like a real idol and an example to follow. However, the police had to prioritize checking the people who had last communicated with the victim of the attack. Naturally, the investigation began with the husband. Investigators went to the hamburger place where, according to Christian, he had gone during the attack. Fortunately, there were surveillance cameras here, and the police requested access to them. After reviewing the footage, they first suspected the man's involvement in the incident. Christian claimed that he had locked the car and went for food to prevent his wife from freezing. He allegedly left the engine running, but the recordings showed that as soon as he entered the establishment, he took out the car key fob, unlocked the doors, and turned off the engine. This wasn't a random gesture. It seemed like he deliberately arranged everything not to leave the car's control system's range but still be far enough away to avoid suspicion. The criminals immediately got into the open car. They acted as if they were waiting for a signal from him and operated too smoothly. As soon as the locks were unlocked, the attackers were already near their target, and all of this did not seem like a random coincidence. Even Christian's actions after finding his wounded wife looked too strange. The man didn't even try to help her. He hesitated for a long time before taking her to the clinic and chose the most remote one. It seemed like the man had an interest in his wife's death after the examination. The crime scene was thoroughly analyzed by forensic experts, and the victim's body was sent to the laboratory for further examination. Forensic experts discovered 11 stab wounds on the deceased, mainly in the neck area. These wounds damaged major arteries, which, combined with the delayed assistance, led to the woman's death. If the husband had immediately reported the attack to the emergency services, and doctors had quickly arrived at the scene or taken the wife to the nearest clinic, Paula's chances of survival would have been significantly higher. It seemed that the victim's husband carefully planned the incident. He intentionally parked the car so that it would not be visible when driving on the adjacent streets, and the perpetrators likely knew that Paula Ortega would be there, and they would not be visible in a secluded place. The calculations went awry only because they did not account for surveillance cameras on the building, capturing the scene of the attack and all their actions. Less than 24 hours after the attack, the police began to consider the victim's husband as the main suspect. On CCTV footage from the cafe, it was clearly seen how he approached the window and unlocked the car. The recordings also showed the moment when the headlights blinked, confirming that Christian was not telling the truth. He claimed that his wife had a gold chain removed, and the robbers stole $600 from her, but these statements turned out to be false. Suspicions that the incident was initially a carefully planned murder arose very quickly. On January 3, 2023, Christian Navarrete was arrested. From the beginning, he denied his involvement in the attack on his own wife and accused the police of not looking for other possible suspects. However, detectives were confident in his involvement, and it remained only to establish the motive for the attack. The police confiscated the man's mobile phone for examination. Law enforcement officers were appalled by Christian's actions in a critical situation. Instead of calling for help, it seemed that he deliberately delayed the process. The husband did not choose the nearest clinic but headed to the farthest one. This action was also seen as a way to buy time and deprive the victim of any chance of survival. Meanwhile, his wife was losing a significant amount of blood in the car. Upon inspecting the main suspect's mobile phone, the police found that immediately upon Christian's return to the car, he checked his phone. However, after the dispatcher's response, he remained silent on the line for about 2 seconds, then hung up without saying a word. When questioned about it, he claimed that he intentionally hung up because he didn't know the exact address of their location with his wife. According to him, Christian wanted to confirm the address on the map, but in the critical situation, it didn't work due to issues with geolocation, and that's why he couldn't call back and provide the address. His response was confusing and vague, indirectly confirming the suspicions of the police. The police then requested a list of calls made by the man on the day of the attack on his wife. It was discovered that on January 2nd, he made over 15 calls to the same number. The goal was to find out whose number it was. Additionally, just 4 minutes after the attack on his wife, Christian made a bank transfer of $2,000. This also seemed suspicious. Upon checking the bank account number, detectives learned that it was registered in the woman's name. She was quickly located, and at some point, she risked becoming the main suspect in the crime. However, the woman had a solid alibi and provided valuable information for the investigation. According to her, shortly before the incident, her cousins, named Byron and Mortis Castillo, had asked to use her bank account. These men resembled the individuals captured on the surveillance camera recordings at the location where the car with the victim was parked. Both had a criminal history with numerous violent episodes. During the investigation, it was revealed that some time before the crime, Christian had introduced these men to the store where his wife worked. He drove them in his car and showed them around the premises of their small business. Presumably, all of this was clearly done to plan the crime and choose the location for the attack. It was discovered that a few days before the assault, Christian had paid them $2,000, likely as an advance. The second identical payment was expected after the successful execution of the attack on the woman, and it was made before the husband took the bleeding woman to the hospital. Police officers also learned that the motives for the attempted murder had emerged approximately a month earlier. On December 8, 2022, Paula's car was stolen. Upon reviewing the surveillance camera footage, the same two young men were identified. However, at that moment, the investigation came to a halt as the police had not yet determined the robbers' identities, with Christian intervening in the case. He claimed that the hijackers had contacted him and offered to return his wife's personal items from the car. Christian went to meet them and returned with all the contents of the trunk and glove compartment, including his wife's wallet with money and cards, which appeared untouched. Upon learning of this, the police were greatly surprised, as such a scenario was atypical for their practice. It was unclear why Christian did not inform the officers that the criminals had contacted him. At the same time, investigators suspected that both incidents were connected. The car thieves had stolen the vehicle and then became the perpetrators of the murder, realizing they were on the brink of imprisonment. To justify his meetings with the criminals, Christian concocted a new story. He had to somehow explain the fact that he had met with them. When the police analyzed the geotags of all three participants in the bloody crime, they confirmed that all three had met repeatedly, and this occurred shortly before the crime. However, when Christian was directly informed about this, he began accusing his accomplices of extortion. According to him, the family was doing well financially, and the Castillo brothers were representatives of organized crime. They took money from Christian and his wife monthly for protection, threatening to burn down the store if they refused to pay. Before the murder of his wife, Christian handed them money for protection, and, unable to pay on time, he became an involuntary accomplice in the crime. Thus, the police arrested the perpetrators of the crime after obtaining this information. Byron immediately confessed to receiving $2,000 from the mastermind of the crime, not as payment for monthly protection, but as an advance for Paula's murder. After the attack, he also received the remaining amount. According to him, the brothers used their cousin's bank account to obscure the traces. On November 29, 2023, all three individuals involved in the murders of Paula and Ortega appeared in court. Testimonies from more than 6 witnesses were collected, revealing the truth about the relationship between the spouses and other aspects of the tragedy. It was revealed that Christian was not the good husband the victim's family thought he was. For years, the woman concealed the cruel treatment by her husband that she endured in the marriage. Christian, who was 3 years younger than his wife, constantly insulted his life partner, calling her ugly and old, accusing her of uselessness, and threatening to leave her. It was established that he threatened to take away their 4-year-old daughter, who was his biological child. The older 14-year-old girl was from another man. The husband's contemptuous attitude manifested in everything. Paula knew he was unfaithful, with at least 4 different women. She forgave his affairs and carefully hid all these horrors from her family, fearing her parents' anger. Long before the tragedy, she feared for her husband, as Paula's father was a strict and serious man, serving as a restraining factor for Christian. However, 2 years before the tragedy, Paula's father succumbed to COVID-19, completely freeing the tyrant. After the father-in-law's death, Christian stopped pretending and revealed his true face. The man was confident in his impunity and his wife's vulnerability, so he began to press on her from all sides. Serious conflicts, psychological, and physical violence began. He threatened to take away their 4-year-old daughter, using it as another means of pressure. However, the family remained unaware of the ongoing abuse for a long time, as Christian carefully concealed it from his close ones. Serious conflicts began after Paula's father's death, and the man openly displayed his aggression and desire to control the situation. All this horror was meticulously hidden from the public eye, as Christian crafted an image of a model husband and a loving father. Detective collected data from various sources, including messaging apps where the spouses communicated, as well as testimonies from friends of the couple, revealed Christian's true nature, who not only humiliated the woman in every way but also regularly cheated on her. When all these pieces of evidence were gathered, Christian was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. These proofs were presented in court, shocking the victim's family. Paula had hidden the horrors of her family life so well that her relatives had no inkling of what was happening until it was too late. The slain woman's family was astounded by the scale of lies that Christian had spun over the years. The snake on his chest was difficult to notice. Tony was determined to achieve justice, so they hired a good lawyer. Their defender, first and foremost, focused on finding evidence of the toxicity of the relationship between the spouses. It was evident that the primary motive for the crime was money. Paula's father had struggled to build a business, which he handed over to his daughter. Christian aimed to take all of it for himself and manage it unilaterally. In his quest to deprive the victim's family of everything they had earned through hard work, the man completely forgot about the family business. Paula's father, on the side of the prosecution, was shocked by the choice Christian had made. He could have acted with integrity and directly told his wife that he wanted to part ways. They could have divorced, subsequently dividing jointly acquired property, even the business, and each could have counted on their fair share. But Christian wanted more. He sought to strip everyone of the right to conduct business in the stores and gain sole custody of the child. It was revealed that initially Christian had intended for the murder to be carried out by the assistants in the gift shop. This was supposed to happen on the same day when Paula was attacked alone. Two men in the alley. However, the woman grew suspicious when two strangers entered the shop towards the end of the workday. Sensing trouble, she called her mother. They were clearly behaving suspiciously and frightened off the victim. After that, they decided not to carry out the attack in the store. Christian became nervous, and at that time, he was far from the scene of the crime to avoid police suspicion. However, after the call from the hired hitmen, the suspect realized that he needed to improvise urgently. In emergency mode, he returned to Sangold to take his wife to an isolated place and literally serve her up to the hired killers on a silver platter. Unfortunately, Paula's daughter agreed to hamburgers, which the man invented as a pretext for the abduction. Christian claimed he was innocent, and all the suspicious actions could somehow be justified by coincidence. He portrayed himself as a loving husband with all his might. However, the prosecution presented enough evidence that implicated the man in blackmail and cruel treatment of his wife. The lack of consequences, Paula's silence, and her relatives' ignorance of Christian's tyranny ultimately led the young successful woman to her death. Numerous surveillance camera recordings and the testimony of dozens of people were collected, allowing the exposure of the deceitful image of the crime's mastermind. During the investigation, there was a hypothesis that Christian exhibited psychopathic traits. The victim's sister noted that his behavior often raised suspicions, confirming that he could be very aggressive towards others. A prison psychiatrist who worked with the suspect concluded that Christian's behavior after the attack on his wife was characteristic of individuals with psychopathy. Such individuals have serious issues in the emotional sphere. They lack empathy, manipulate without feeling responsibility or guilt. According to the psychologist, shocks in the couple's married life could have occurred, causing Christian to harbor resentment towards his wife. Despite the numerous pieces of evidence against Christian, the trial dragged on for almost a year. In the end, it was convincingly proven that the victim's husband and Byron devised a plan to eliminate the young woman. Byron became the main accomplice and chief executor, delivering the knife blows to the defenseless victim. After reviewing the case materials, the jury concluded that all three were guilty, facing 34 years and 8 months of imprisonment. Although the family of the deceased managed to achieve justice, they have not yet come to terms with the bitterness of their loss. The younger daughter, who was only 4 years old at the time of her mother's murder, remembers her well. She has an imaginary friend whom she calls Mom. The 14-year-old girl was seriously affected by the incident, and she even had to be hospitalized due to the trauma she experienced. Paula's mother largely blames herself, believing that she was too short-sighted to see the true situation in her daughter's family and failed to provide assistance. Not a day goes by for Paula without remembering her with tears in her eyes. And what do you think about this story? Leave your opinion in the comments below the video, give your likes, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget about the bell. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.